Good morning and welcome back. I hope you had a good weekend. I've been using this time to share part of my story with you. I've talked about the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, and now I want to talk a little bit about the 90s because that was a time when we met. I have to say, somewhere in that mid 90s when we came together, it was a difficult time for us and also for the congregation as well. We were living in Oak Ridge. Things were going very well at the church where we were serving. We had seen a wonderful explosion of the Holy Spirit at work. People who had not been followers of Jesus Christ were coming to Christ as adults. They were inviting their unbelieving friends who were coming to Christ. We were seeing whole families being baptized at the same time. It was an exciting time. There were times we would gather around the table and eat with one another, and the topic always centered on what is God doing in your life. We had never been a part of anything like that before, so it was really tremendously exciting and a great gift that God had given to us. Then, somewhere in the late spring, I got a call from Gene Benson, who was the chair of the Pastor Search Committee. And he invited me to come to Maryville, and after that first meeting with the committee, we decided to have more conversations. I remember I was kind of hesitant at the beginning because I really enjoyed where I was working and serving. And I remember in one of those meetings, we had had a number of them, Bob Jones, who was a member also of that search committee, said, "You just crossed over. All of this time you have been saying, if I were to come to Monte Vista as your pastor, then ... He said, but you just said, and I don't know if you realized it or not, but you just said, when I come to be pastor at Monte Vista. That really was a threshold of a moment because I had been wondering about what it was going to be like to leave a congregation that was really doing very well. And in some ways, I felt a little bit like Moses, who stood on the top of Mount Nebo and looked over into the promised land. And God said, you're not the one who's going to be going there. Somebody else is going to be leading this congregation in Oak Ridge into the promised land. I've got something else for you. Well, it was a hard move for us. It was a hard move for the girls, too. They had made a lot of good friends. And one of the things that we did to entice them was to try to talk about the good things that were here in Maryville. We told them there was a Dairy Queen. We didn't have one in Oak Ridge. And that was kind of an exciting thing. We also told them that we had been noticing over the years that the school system had a lot of snow here, and the school systems closed a lot. Well, we got here, and it wasn't long before the Dairy Queen closed. And then we also figured it out once we got here that Blount County is the one who gets the snow and closed. Maryville City is always open. To this day, our girls tell us that we trick them into coming here by telling us those things. It was also a difficult move for the congregation. Howard had been here as pastor for 30 years, and many of the people who were in the congregation, he was the only person that they knew as pastor. So it was hard for them to imagine what Monte Vista would be like with someone else in that position. The church had also gone through a big denominational struggle, and they had established their identity, sort of knew where they wanted to go and who they wanted to be. So it was a big risk on who this next person might be. Would it be somebody who could continue to help them follow in the direction that they wanted to go? I read not too long ago this quotation about grace. It says, grace is not about us. It is a word about God. It is his initiative and his extravagant demonstration of care and favor. So I have to say that for me, the 90s was a time of grace. The very weekend that we came to meet the congregation, there were little episodes of grace all over the place. A couple of the families who had children daughters the same age as our daughters just took our girls into their home for the weekend and helped them to get rooted and grounded and established and to meet some people. That was important for us. I also met a man by the name of Floyd Dunn. Floyd had gone to school with my dad in North Georgia. In fact, I have a photograph of them somewhere standing in front of that school, probably about 10, 12 in their class. And Floyd told me, he said, one Sunday morning, we were standing in church, we were singing, it was the invitation hymn. Your grandmother came over, took me by the arm, and whispered in my ear and said, "It's time for you to go forward." So she walked forward with me. We knelt down and prayed together at the altar, and that was the moment I gave my life to Jesus Christ. I loved that story because I didn't know my grandmother. She had died before I was born. I'd heard a lot about her, and so it made that kind of spiritual connection for me almost right off the bat that let me know I was beginning to feel at home, and I wasn't even here. I felt that grace again the first week that I was here serving. I needed something in the office, something like legal pads or something. And so I asked, what kind of process do I need to do? What kind of requisitions do I need to fill out in order to get some legal pads? They all laughed at me. Charlene Brown, who was the secretary, said, "You don't have to do any of that. If you need something, you just go and get it." She said, "We have very few policies here, very few procedures. Instead of operating on those things, we operate on love and on need and on grace. If somebody's hungry, we do our best to feed them. If somebody has run out of money before they've run out of month, then we try to do what we can to help them. If they need a ride, then we try to find one for them. Whatever the needs are, those are the things that are priorities for us. It doesn't matter who they are or what they've done, how many times they've come. We want to treat them with respect, and we want to treat them with love. And we want them to know that there is a God in heaven who loves them and who is bestowing on them this great, extravagant demonstration of his care and his favor." So when I look back on the 90s, I look at that as a time when I was just immersed in grace. I experienced it in the baptistries and around dining room tables. I experienced it with those families who invited my children into their home, and in the story of an older man who just connected with me to my past, really in a spiritual way. I experienced it on those mountaintops. I experienced it in a church that was willing to take a risk. I also experienced it in a secretary who loved unconditionally and who always had a chair in her room ready for anyone to sit down because she was never too busy to listen and to talk and to love and to be that vehicle for grace. That was an introduction to Monte Vista to me, a church that was filled with grace. I still talk about those experiences. When people ask me to say, "What is it about Monte Vista? What can you tell me?" And I always say, I can tell you in a nutshell. It's a place where grace abounds. So my prayer today for myself and for you also is that you and I will be the vehicles of God's extravagant demonstration of his care and provision and love for someone who needs to know about him and about his love and his power to change lives. It was a great decade, and I'm glad that God introduced us during that decade because it has been a wonderful journey, and it's one that's not over. Hope you have a great day. I'll see you on Wednesday.